Okay, I was in Baldwin from 1949 to 1970, and then in Freeport from 71 to now. There's very little that hasn't changed. Um, there's less green spots, more housing, that, and a lot of the older people kept animals and things when I was small, that they don't do now, of course, because it's against the law. But, you know, it's grown up, let's put it to you that way. Over the years, it's grown up. When I was in school, for one, I went through all the way through Baldwin schools. I was in the class of '67 at Baldwin High School. Um, I think when I was younger, it was because everybody in the community knew each other. I mean, if you went out someplace and you needed help, you could knock on anybody's door and they'd know who you are and who you belong to. And it works the other way too. If you got into trouble, everybody knew. So, but the education here was wonderful. I was very well prepared for college. Um, my house was the last house on Milburn Avenue, and that was Jackson Street, before the Oakwood development was built. And that was on the edge of a meadow, a very big meadow, that was full of rabbits and snakes and wildflowers and blackberry bushes and everything like that. And I used to wander around in there when I was little. I mean, I had my faithful dog. I figured, like Timmy had Lassie and Rusty had Rin Tin Tin. Well, I had my dog Poochie, except for one small problem, he was a Cocker Spaniel. And we would wander around together and then eventually get home and catch the dickens from being gone. So we played a lot of times on the meadows. And we played at each other's houses because we were all interrelated somehow. So we played at each other's houses, we played in empty lots. It was a lot of imagination play. We didn't have a great deal. So it was just something, you just make up things. We made up circuses and carnivals. Nobody ever came, but it was the idea of making it up. And it was fun. We used to throw rocks and stuff at the bulldozers when they were digging up the meadow, because we didn't like that. So we were kind of.
Where were the meadows?
We were the last house on Milburn Avenue, which was Jackson Street back in the old days. And beyond that, where Oakwood development is now, that was all meadow. Salt marsh. Yeah, they dug up everything. And then on top of that, they dredged up sand from the bay, because the houses in Oakwood they're on wood pilings. And then they backfilled with sand. And so those houses are beginning to settle now, because the water is still there, even if you have sand on top of it. And so it's going to be like Venice. Venice is built almost the same way. So eventually it just sinks. The wood gives out from the pilings. And also you develop termites. The original house on our property was there since 1770, but it was torn down after World War II, and so another house was built. I think we originally were in Hempstead, then we moved to Thomas Avenue, and then down to where we are. They went down that far to get away from the Revolutionary War. They didn't want to take sides. So they kind of bowed out of the whole thing, went down where they wouldn't be bothered. Not in Baldwin. I mean, I belonged to the Teachers Association and that kind of thing when I was working. But I've been retired now 10 years. We were the class that named the Bruins. We actually had several names to pick from, and we voted for the Bruins.
What were the other choices?
I don't remember. I think one was the Bears. There weren't a lot of choices to pick from that would fit the situation. Even the Bruins really doesn't fit. But that was the best choice. So they had it set up in the Commons, and you could go and vote. When I was younger, it was actually relatives, all the relatives in Baldwin, and we all lived together because we were intermarried with some of the older families over the time, and so we had get-togethers and things that we had a good time. But my great-grandfather was a rum runner, and he was on the FBI's list. So my dad used to tell me of the rum in the kitchen of his house being piled up to the ceiling, because they would go out on their boats and get the whiskey from Canada or from England and then bring it in on small boats. I was on the newspaper in high school, and back then teachers invited their students to the houses, their own houses, so that we could get together and talk and work together. So that took place, and there's always the choir and the other things like that, English teams, that kind of thing. I do genealogy and historical research, mostly from the Civil War. We had a general in the family, so we do a lot of places where the general had been, and now they're having a 150th anniversary of this battle or 150th of that one. So we go to be his representative since he had no children. I was a studier. I was kind of a mouse. I had my head in a book all the time. So really nothing. I was surprised to see that you still have the blue and gold teams. That was interesting. But really, I didn't get into a great deal. And I had a working mom, so of course you have to go home and do some of the work around the house and stuff. So that was difficult. My mother was a school crossing guard, in Baldwin for 32 years at the corner of Milburn and Pacific Street. Yes, when it would flood, you know, like hurricanes or just sometimes moon tides, the tide would come in across the wetlands. And because of that, along came the fish and the crabs and all that. But when the tide receded, they didn't recede with the tide. So they'd be stuck in your bushes or around the bottom of your trees or, you know, odd places around the house. Sometimes you didn't find them out in the yard until they were bad. And when they were bad, then you could trace down where they were. We had a very happy cat next door named Minnie. Minnie would get up in the trees and just wait till the tide receded, and then she'd go down and have a meal. A lot of fishing boats down by us. There was the Gannet and the Wonderless. The Gannet was a great big boat. The Wonderless was smaller, and you could go and get fresh fish right at the dock. In the fall, a man would come down with a horse and wagon every year and cut the salt hay. Because salt hay is good for some animals to eat, and is also good bedding for ornamental plants and bushes. So he would come down all the time. The horse came from Thomas Avenue, and there was two of them that stayed there. And we had, everybody around us had some kind of an animal, you know, chickens, ducks. The neighbor tried a sheep one time, but it made so much noise that he had to get rid of it. It would go day and night. You know, it was a different way of life. You know, because I remember going out and getting the eggs when the eggs were warm, where the chicken had just laid them or they'd been sat on. And we raised baby chicks in a box by our stove, where it was warm. So, and then on Church Street, there was Mr. Eckhart's store, which was a feed store. And he also raised chickens and things in his establishment. And if your eggs failed, you could go and get the chickens at his place. But now Eckhart's has been torn down. It's just a nice big empty lot. Mr. Eckhart went down to Florida. I don't know. We raised ducks in Freeport for the longest time. We were in rescue, so we would take any of the orphans that were found around and raise them in our backyard. And since they were wild, eventually they flew off on their own. And we're still into wildlife rescue. We do dogs and cats and things like that. But back in that time, it wasn't backward. It was just old-fashioned. You know, you had a general store on Church Street, and that carried just about everything you needed. And we had a county agent. The county agent would come down because there wasn't street water that far down. So we had a well. Not an open well, but, you know, a well. And he'd have to test our water, and he'd have to take it up to the pharmacist, which was then Mr. Splecia, and he would test it, and then we'd get our results back to see if the water was still, you know, potable. Yeah, there was a lot of silent movie stars and, you know, the Folly Girls and things that would come out here on the weekends and party. They would just stop at my grandfather's and pick up a couple of cases of whiskey, and then they would party, because there was a place down in Bay Colony where they could go and stay. And then in Freeport, there was a little yacht club that the movie stars had. Gabby Hayes, I don't know if you know who he was, but he lived right on Pacific Street in Baldwin. And we had Broderick Crawford and, what was his name? Well, it was Zorro's sidekick, who lived in Freeport on Long Beach. And a lot of the Zickfield girls would come out in their big shiny cars and stuff and take my dad to buy candy, which he thought was pretty cool, because they all had, you know, big fancy cars. It was nice. We didn't have a lot of money. You know, we were poor. My dad came home from the Second World War with cancer. And of course, that's very expensive to treat even back then. And they gave him experimental radiation because he had plate burns on his back and his chest. But he got another 37 years out of it before it reoccurred. And so, you know, it was good. I mean, my grandmother knew every flower by name, every animal. You know, she had lived there so long that, you know, she just picked up everything. She used to go over to get fish and buy fish, but when she came home to her father, she had to turn over American money to British money, because he never learned American money, even though he had lived here, you know, his whole life. He just preferred to use English money.